Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the host of White House Chronicle. We're going to do something a little different today. We're going to take a stroll down memory lane. The reason for that is so many candidates vying for the presidency are talking about the good old days, about when America was great, etc., etc. It's a constant theme. Well, some of us are getting to a point where we can remember the good old days, and some things were quite wonderful, and some things weren't as wonderful. To take this stroll, arm in arm as it were, at least metaphorically, I'm joined by Robert Whitcomb, who's not as old as I am, I rush to say, and who is the adjunct fellow at the Pell Center, which is a think tank in Newport, Rhode Island, a former journalist with the Wall Street Journal, with the Rhode Island newspaper, and many other activities. Also has a website, New England
Diary.
New England Diary. It's jolly good. You can read my columns on it. And Linda Gasparello, the co-host of this program. I can't forget you, Linda, can I?
Oh, I'm so glad your memory hasn't let you down.
Thank you. And I will assure you that Linda is much younger than I am.
So the memory holds out through the show.
Yes.
But it's the little things that have changed. The big things we know about. We know about the internet, but the little things in daily life, we thought we'd talk about how they've changed. And we're going to start by talking about how menus have changed. I can remember when there were certain standard things on menus, and Linda and Bob will help me with this, but there was always a half grapefruit with a cherry stuck in it. There was always a New Zealand lobster tail, i.e. not a real lobster at all, a crayfish tail, and it had been frozen, but it appeared on many, many menus, etc. Linda, what do you remember of menus of, say, half a century ago, or not quite half a century? Or
All right, what I really remember about menus was that there was a level of formality in the menus. There was a level of eating and of ceremony in the menus that really suggested a formality. And that formality meant that the menus included many, many courses. I remember very fondly the relish tray. Bob, you remember this?
Yes, it was revolting.
Every New England restaurant had the relish tray.
It wasn't just New England. I mean, in Washington, the great National Press Club in Washington, it had a relish tray, and it was always brought up, and, you know, if you were a little short of money, you could eat the relish tray and the bread and butter and say, I'm not hungry tonight.
Over-sugared relish with sort of carcinogenic elements to it.
No, I mean, the relish trays were something that were a nice way to begin the dinner. Yeah. And then I think what happened to them was they disappeared when I think the MBAs got into the restaurant business.
It was celery, radishes.
Right.
You had pickled relishes. You had sometimes herrings on them. You had all sorts of things that
the
would
herring.
be there.
I missed that too. Herrings or sardines or something.
Exactly.
Right.
There'd be things like that.
It was basically cocktail party food.
Yeah, and then there would be somebody would come by, the roll lady. Remember, she would come by with these
that
wonderful.
was her job.
And then the front was the cigarette lady.
And there's a cigarette lady too, right? But
so.
this tremendous sort of formality that you had in restaurants. So certainly restaurants in the 50s
and they didn't give you their first names.
No,
who started that? And why are all waiters named Bruce?
Bruce. Well, if they're in Australia, they are.
Well,
I think here it's Bob.
Well, I don't want to know their first name. They shouldn't know mine.
For the fun of it, I want to say one day when one of these waitresses or waiters comes to and says, "My name is Bruce. I'm your wait person," I want to say, "My name is King. I'm your customer. Please remember it." But I'm looking at this menu here of that period, 1974, and how cheap it is, at the very expensive Simpsons in the Strand in London, which is a very classic English restaurant.
Fancy place.
Well, not so fancy. It's very English, with roast beef and game, but it also has lots of things that you don't see these days. Roast grouse, for example. Game chips. Roast pheasant. Very English. Steak, kidney, and mushroom pie. delicious, I assure you. Don't listen to him.
Instant coronary infarction.
How about curried mutton, rice and chutney? That was also
actually, that's good.
We had that. We had that in menus in the United States.
We had chutney in a lot of stuff.
There was a curry. There was always a curry.
Chutney has sort of disappeared.
Well,
chutney was on the relish tray if you cared to eat it.
Like shades of S.S. Pierce Company.
Now
That's right,
they
of Boston.
describe various things. They dress things with this chutney, but it's not really a classic. Remember, the classic was Major Gray's chutney.
That's right. That was the official one.
It came from India, and it was always the same.
It was mango chutney.
It was made from mangoes. It wasn't made from gooseberries or anything else. And now they make it out of almost anything. Anyway, let me go on looking at this. I was actually in 1974 in this restaurant, and some of these things I remember.
You was working in the kitchen.
No, I was not working in the kitchen. I was rather more prosperous then than I am today. Not everything gets better with time. Stewed tripe and onions with creamed potatoes, or omelette on a dinner menu.
That's true.
That's good.
But the most amazing thing, honestly, on the Simpsons menu, Llewellyn, is the fact that after you have finished this glorious meal, it is followed by something called a savory. Savories are things like mushrooms and bacon on toast, Welsh rarebit.
Yeah, that's disappeared. That was after, but that wasn't very American.
No, we're just saying this
never
is
really got to America.
That was very
We did. Some of our restaurants did have
Boston
them. Oh, sure they did.
Like that?
Hotel restaurants did. If you went to a hotel restaurant
actually,
in New York,
the Ritz may have had
absolutely.
that. The old
Ritz-Carlton in Boston
right.
had
Along with unsalted butter.
I remember when a lot of hotel restaurants were very pretentious and having French names on things and not very good at cooking at all. Let's move on.
May I just say, Scotch whitcock is a savory Llewellyn. That is scrambled eggs. Can you imagine us eating scrambled eggs after a huge dinner at Simpson's? But people do.
Well, people do.
You eat scrambled eggs drunk after drinking too much champagne.
And you would have that at
2
Simpson's, believe me.
Right.
There's a great story about Henry Luce, who created Time magazine. No, it wasn't. It was his rival, Lord Beaverbrook, the British publisher, who was standing at the water. Well,
let's face it, a Canadian.
Britain. He lived in England. Eventually, most of his life actually, after he'd made a lot of money in Canada, he went to England and lived it up. But anyway, he was staying at his suite, permanent residence he had in the Waldorf Astoria in New York, and the foreign editor of his newspaper, the Daily Express, was invited to have a business discussion. And knowing that he was going to see Lord Beaverbrook and have a wonderful dinner, he didn't eat on the plane. He was famished, but he was ready for rows and rows of wonderful, delectable things served by great waiters. And he got there, and Beaverbrook looked at the menu and said, "That's not very good here. Have the scrambled eggs. It's what I eat." And so he
didn't dare order anything else.
Oh, no,
he was not.
No. Anyway, let's move on.
By this time was a religious figure.
When did the modern age begin?
For me?
Yes.
For me? I would say when air conditioning became pervasive, even in cool parts of the United States. When we started getting air conditioning in cars and houses and homes. That, to me, was the great change. That would have been in the 60s.
It had, in the 60s, electricity consumption was doubling every 10 years because of the effect of air conditioning.
Right.
But I remember working in New York, in newspapers in New York, the World Telegram and the New York Post. If you were an editor, you could do rather like a musician. You could do pickup work. You could go here, there, and going into these unbelievably hot places.
I have to tell the story. My first newspaper job, which I got
You don't have to, but I think
it's pretty gruesome. It was in the Boston Record American, which was a terrible tabloid paper, being produced and printed in a big granite building in Winthrop Square in downtown Boston. They had no air conditioning there whatsoever. There was no breeze. It was this tight little area. And we had big stacks of salt tablet containers in the newsroom. People would keep taking salt tablets to avoid passing out.
Who could believe that you could be passed out in Boston?
There was a thermometer in there. One very hot day, around the 1st of August. I think it was 105 in that room.
Wow.
And despite the, you know, the big old fans.
People don't understand
and
how
everyone chain smoking.
absolutely unattractive newsrooms
were.
They usually looked as though there
hideous.
were swimming pools that the water had been let out of,
Yeah.
and there was this mark on the wall.
After a cholera epidemic.
They hadn't painted them forever.
No, it's
There
a
were
sickly
broken
green
desks,
paint.
and people would seek out the typewriter that they knew worked best.
And there were liquor bottles everywhere.
Yeah.
And
there was
cigarette smoke.
Cigarettes
Holy moly.
everywhere.
And copy boys running around getting people coffee.
Linda, when
and,
did the modern age
cigarettes.
begin for you?
I think the modern age began for me in 2 ways, and it had to do with transportation. One, that you could fly to Paris very quickly, and so therefore I traveled a lot when I was very young.
And cheaply. You could do it cheaply. Take Icelandic Airlines.
Absolutely.
I did.
You could, instead of the 20 hours it used to take to get to
About
Europe, it took
$180.
7.
Yeah.
Okay, the second one was our highway system, when you could really get out and go. This transformed, I think, us into the modern age in no other way.
The interstate highway system.
Yes.
For me, this is not nearly as dramatic, but for me, it began with push-button telephone. And as journalists, we make a lot of telephone calls, and the old rotary dial was said, you know, we had pencils we did it with. You could get things that had a little gadget.
Yeah, you had a
but it
little
was
thing that you
still
put
work.
into some of the holes to speed it up.
It was work.
Yeah.
And then at the World's Fair in New York City, I encountered the first push-button telephone, and I thought, this is a great advance. This is a marvelous gadget. And you know, there have been a lot of advances since then that have changed the nature of our work in journalism, largest of which may have been, well, there are many, but one of which was Xerox, because when we got a secret document, we had to copy it, all copy.
Yeah, of course, we had mimeograph machines.
Mimeographs.
Before then.
Which
It
were
was great to
terrible.
drink mimeograph fluid.
But how about telex?
Next up.
Telex. That was
Telex
just so
started
important.
in the 19th century. I mean, telex was long established.
It's
Telex
famously
was-
unreliable. You'd have these outages, you know.
But telex and cable was how we communicated. And there was actually an early form of fax, which was called picture by wire.
Right,
And we'd
right.
have them in with all these photographs coming on this very skinny, very light onion skin paper, just coming in the newsroom. And we'd look up and say, hey, that looks like a good one. We'd cut it off.
That's right, yeah.
And send
These
it off
great
to be
big
worked
silver.
on by
All
the
right,
art
so for
department.
journalism, not having to deal with carbon copies anymore, to
Right.
remember having to
Sure.
do that,
Yeah.
that
A
was
book. We called it a
absolute-
book.
The book.
Book,
We
yeah.
always called it a book. We
Royal
always called-
typer. What about the telegram too? I could add. I think my world started to fall apart when telegrams disappeared, because I love sending telegrams to people I did not want to deal with.
Well, you got
To cancel an
Really?
appointment.
email. That's
Yes,
right.
of
And
course.
I was even more cowardly then
Yeah.
than I am now. And I used to use these things as a very impersonal way of cutting off relationships. So I would send people telegrams and, you know, stop and all that stuff. And in my family, we've had a tradition of this. And I have scrapbooks in my cellar of telegrams going back to, I think, the late 19th century.
they're marvelous.
All negative.
Okay, so Bob,
One of the great user of telegrams was, of course, Winston Churchill. There are telegrams, the one that he sent when Charles de Gaulle, who was a notoriously difficult man, was coming during the Second World War, coming to America. FDR asked him by telegram, because that's how you communicated, probably secure in some way, why he was sending him. And de Gaulle said, why am I forget, to have this inflicted on me? And Churchill wrote back, I have borne the cross of Lorraine long enough.
The heaviest cross he ever
There's
wore.
another great Churchill telegram, which was Winston Churchill, Winston Churchill, Bernard Shaw, the playwright, who was a socialist and very, very left-wing, and nonetheless they were friends. It was quite common at that time, where people of absolutely
all the celebrities knew each other.
diverse views. That's right. And Shaw sent Churchill this telegram saying, I have reserved seats for you for first night. Bring a friend if you have one. And Churchill sends the telegram back which says, Can't make first night. Please reserve 2 for second night if you have one. All right, let's move on here. We need to do a little station identification for people who think they've tuned into the wrong channel. We're primarily doing this. This is White House Chronicle with me, Llewellyn King, and we are talking about the way things were. The program is as I said, White House Chronicle, which is seen on public television stations and PEG stations, which are the old public access stations, but particularly we're doing this identification for our listeners on Sirius XM Radio Channel 124, where we have 4 airings, and we thank POTUS very much for that, of the audio from this program. As I said, my guest is Robert Whitcomb, who I didn't realize was as old as his narrative seems to intimate he is.
My aging is accelerating.
And Linda Gasparello, the co-host of this program.
Feeling younger by the moment.
This program can also be seen around the world on the English language stations of the Voice of America and on some of their radio broadcasts. I am, of course, Llewellyn King, if I can just about remember my own name. Obviously, I'm so old. Anyway, some of the things that are different with time, little daily things that have changed enormously, apart from prices, which are out of sight. When I came to America in 1963 and lived in New York City, you tipped a taxi a nickel if it was a short ride, a quarter to a doorman for calling you a taxi, which was considered, you know, but there was no sort of easy in-between. You didn't want to give them 2 dimes. Now, that hasn't gone up that much compared to everything else, because people still give the doorman at a hotel anywhere $1 usually. I give them $2
Yeah, or
now.
5 or something.
But things have changed there.
But you're saying what? Tipping is old-fashioned?
No, I'm just saying that tipping was actually quite modest in those days. I didn't think it was all that great. 10% was considered a tip, and then it went up to 15. Now it's at 20%.
Well, everything else was
my
going
father
up.
was a very nice man, very generous man. He always tipped 20.
Yeah.
Even with bad service.
Yeah,
He may have just been his reticence or something, but...
Do you tip in hotels?
I do. Yeah.
I always do.
I do.
I always
I
leave
tip
some money on the
everywhere.
bed.
I always
do,
leave something
everywhere.
for the maid
Because I think they're being
anybody
mistreated.
Who does, they are being
They're
mistreated.
grossly mistreated.
And
They're
it's horrible
underpaid.
work.
They're dealing with awful people, and not just, what's his name, Dominique Strauss.
God.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of people like
Exactly.
that, but less famous.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Yeah.
Clothes have changed.
Okay, clothes. Let's start on
Clothes,
that one.
everybody used to be much more formal.
Yes, yes.
So, all right, I'm
Especially
going to
in
blame
travel.
this on a couple of things.
Show
Number
business.
one,
Show
show
business.
business, rock musicians, the sloppiness. Nobody would throw somebody out of a great restaurant, whether it's France or New York or Boston, if you were Mick Jagger and you were wearing blue jeans, okay? Now that is de rigueur. Everybody can come in dressed sloppily. Right. And the other thing that changed was everybody wanted comfort. I think we have Lycra to blame. We have definitely Lycra to blame for this. Yeah.
Well,
Do we
And
all?
there's no sense of occasion. The other thing is kind of the decline of sense of occasion. If you went on a trip, if you got on a train or a plane, you got dressed up. And to this day, folks, you still get better service if you do.
I do.
Absolutely.
I always wear a jacket and a tie getting on a plane. Everyone else is wearing these horrible T-shirts.
Oh man, going through TSA these days.
No shoes.
Get dressed.
Yeah.
Well, if there's
service.
an argument, and there frequently is with airlines, the way they are these days, it helps if you look as though you've got some substance.
But remember, going to the airport was a huge thrill. Everybody got dressed to go to the airport.
And of course, you look forward to it. Every other plane crashed then, but you know.
But Llewellyn said when you were living in London that you used to get dressed to go to dinner at Heathrow Airport, that it was like an occasion.
Oh yes, airports were an occasion. They had good restaurants. Even JFK, anybody who would go to JFK for any reason but to fly now is out of their mind.
But you look at the lack of
It was
dressing.
better when it was Idlewild. I traced the decline from the name change.
By the way, but it's also happened to Heathrow, which was called London Airport and then reverted to the area's previous name. When it was London Airport, we would go, and I was a young man, we'd actually go to restaurants in the airport on dates because they were quite good. And one of the best steak au poivre I've ever had was at Kennedy in New York. You wouldn't go near an airport to eat now if you could possibly help it.
But you know, we got dressed to go to the theater. I remember one of the greatest thrills I had in New York was when I finally could afford a ticket to the Metropolitan Opera. And the night that I went, I got my long dress on, my best coat, my best shoes, and I thought, this is what you do when you go to the opera. And I saw that people weren't dressed. I felt like an utter fool.
Well,
there I wasn't.
Try church. My mother.
Or church.
My mother would not have gone to church.
Funerals. I was at a funeral a few weeks ago for a fairly well-known individual, distinguished individual, and there were people there, several people there with T-shirts.
Well,
T-shirts.
Churches, people in cutoffs, people in sandals, and the theater likewise. And it's a terrible price for the theater, because the theater is the theater, and if you put on nice clothes, you join the play. If you dress up, you get a heightening of this theatricality of the event, which you don't get when people are dressed like slobs.
Right. You can imagine an actor looking out at the audience dressed up. People, men in tuxes, you know, women in
opening nights
dresses.
in New York, people would show up in tails. It's a great scene of Cole Porter being carried in. You know, he was basically paralyzed from his shattered leg, and he was being carried in with a white tie and tails. And there were other people sitting there wearing the same.
But they had all they were dressed up. They were in the theater, playing a role in the theater. Now they're just, and this actually started.
It is.
The rot started.
The rock stars.
The rot started.
With the rock stars.
Not with the rock stars. Actually started with George Bernard Shaw.
No.
Him again.
He would insist on wearing this ghastly brown lounge suit when everybody wore dinner dress. And gradually, and then the socialists and the social, they used to call it kitchen sink drama.
John Osborne.
And people like Pap in New York, that the theater was for everyone. You know, they had this idea, and it really did have this idea that you would park a truck that you were driving, and you would pop in, enjoy some Shakespeare, and then get back in the truck and drive overnight. And it didn't work. It didn't really work.
You know, Joe Papp's theater in New York being accessible didn't mean that you couldn't wear great clothes to go to the theater. It's just, it was absolutely accessible.
People were pulled down because he was doing stuff in Central Park. Outdoor
sat many
stuff.
All right.
I noticed that you have got this thing around your neck, and I got one here.
Luce.
But actually, neckties have gone practically. Hardly anybody wears them. Hats for men went altogether, except in winter. That was JFK.
That's right.
And, you know, my father would not go out anywhere without
There's
a hat.
wonderful, I think it was John Updike or John Cheever's story, kind of looking back to the 40s. He said, and all men wore hats. I still remember that.
And all men wore hats,
All men wore hats,
Well, you remember journalists would put their press credentials on the brim of their hat? That's right.
Well, women wore them too. We had plenty of hats. Everybody had hat boxes. The other day I was looking around for a hat box, actually, to give somebody a gift, and I thought, I'm going to have to make this. I mean, I don't think the hat box even exists anymore.
By the way, I was once thrown out of a bar in Boston that you've probably been to because I was with a young woman who was wearing blue jeans.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was actually the Ritz bar.
Oh, right. Oh, yes.
I came up, murmured in my, I'm sorry, we've served you a drink, sir, but you'll have to go.
Well, the famous restaurant in New York, Cote Basque, would not seat men unless they put on ties. And they had a big supply of jackets and ties. A lot of restaurants.
Clubs.
Clubs.
Well, and a lot of clubs still have the
some
coat
of it was
and
a bit
ties
silly. I went to the
still.
Army-Navy Club in Washington with a friend of mine who had shingles, and they insisted. It was crazy. I said we should go to a restaurant. Anyway, what other ways? Of course, everything has changed with the electronics of our lives. We carry telephones with us. We carry electronic books
peace.
with us.
Directions.
peace.
People don't know how to read a map
directions.
anymore.
Yes,
And I mean,
you're
I came
right.
down, I can never remember how to get to where we're right now, so I use
Also,
GPS, and that's changed everything. So I don't bother looking anything up. So I'm really more ignorant than I used to be, because this little thing right here is telling me exactly what to do.
That's
I
right.
went all over Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, which I know nothing about with this,
Of course you could.
telling me take a left, take a right.
That has
And,
been a lifesaver for
yeah,
people who
yeah.
are directionally
Yeah,
challenged.
I'm
Believe me.
pretty good at
But-
directions, but this is
but,
better.
you know,
What
remember
I
the old
find,
argument?
the more you use these aids, the worse you become at what you are
Well, it's
quite
like you
good at.
can't calculators, handheld calculators. So these people at these little stores, fast food, they don't know how to add or subtract.
That's very true. That's true. May I say about the GPS, it has saved many a marriage. Remember how Dad would never ask for
that's
directions,
right. Yeah,
and your
yeah.
mother would always
And
be
she'd
at the
be like
gas
that,
station saying,
right,
"Would
she'd be
you
like
just
that.
ask for some
Yeah,
directions?"
men don't ask directions.
Many
Yeah,
marriages
because you
have
get the
been
wrong
saved.
direction.
I don't know, it's a
You get the wrong
testosterone thing
direction.
or whatever.
And
I
I don't know
never
what it
asked
is either.
my wife yelling at me, ask directions.
Yeah, yeah, uh-huh.
She can't take a joke.
Well, we've decided that the restaurants are different. We haven't decided they're worse. Certainly,
Better. Food's better.
there's a lot more
I
fast
think food is
than-
better.
Food is infinitely better.
It
and
is.
a lot more fast food than there used to be.
Right.
That's
Quite
not better.
and there's a lot of it. I mean, it's interesting how some people really don't know anything
But
except
that's-
fast food.
But that's what's different, the pace of life. We had much more time before, which gave us the formality with restaurants.
You know, I grew
We
up.
don't have any more any
And to
time.
read a novel.
Right, to read.
I
right.
read a lot of novels, but I
recreational
read
reading.
them on the carry around electronic books. So if I've got 5-10 minutes, I read. And I do read novels. But I remember, and this is not true, but I remember listening in Africa where I grew up to the sort of BBC
World
split
Service.
off. Yeah. And somebody saying, well, it was called the transcription service, whatever that meant. But saying, well, before the Second World War, we used to read a novel a day. Now it's hard to finish one in a week.
That's right.
Of course, people were also often very bored. And I want to put a plug in here for the wonders of the internet, not in the way that you usually think of it. And that is, I do some work for a charity called, the disease is chronic fatigue syndrome, also known as myalgia and encephalomyelitis, with an awful lot of bedridden people across the country and across the world. And their lives have been so improved and relieved by their ability to use social media and just to learn from that they are not alone,
They're
or
not.
to learn little
Sense
things.
of community is.
And also just
You're
little
not as
bits
cut off
of
from
advice.
the world when you have the internet.
If you were
Yes.
bedridden in those days, you had to read, and if you couldn't read, you were in terrible, terrible shape. Either because you had never learned to read or for some other reason,
Or
like you had no.
You couldn't get out to buy a book, and you couldn't go to a library, so you really were cut off.
That's right. That's right. Well, talking of cut off, it's time to cut you off, Linda.
I knew you were going to say that.
And you thought you've been doing this program too long.
Call your lawyer.
And Bob Whitcomb, it's lovely to see you on the program.
You're looking lovely too, Llewellyn.
Long may you live.
That is our show. Be of cheer. The good old days weren't bad, and they weren't that great either. All the best. Cheers.